A lot of people feel that somehow the political approach to veganism, ecology, and animal rights is more depressing than the lifestyle approach, or the consumer-centered approach, or the yoga-centered approach, or the health and fitness and weight loss-centered approach. And it's not. And I'll tell you why. I'm going to respond here to just a couple of seconds from a podcast by a guy named Michael Goodchild. He uses the name The Vegan Activist on the internet, but obviously we're going to refer to him as Michael Goodchild because calling him The Vegan Activist is just ridiculous. But here's a moment of him reflecting on how bleak and depressing the reality of his life as a vegan activist really is. It's a long podcast. He did a 2-hour podcast meditating on how disappointed he is with veganism. I understand. And you'll see why, actually, an explicitly political approach to veganism is in many ways much more optimistic. It gives me a much brighter outlook on life. Here we go.
It's a very long, slow process of supply and demand where we have to keep not buying these products and buying the other products for them to realise that we need to stock less. And a lot of products get wasted along the way, and that's quite hard to deal with. And we can use that as a justification to keep eating animals. But, you know, if 500 people stop buying the regular milk and start buying the soy milk, they put like 2 less crates of that in the supermarket, and very slowly we start to see a less demand for the farmers, so they stop breeding as many animals, and then all of a sudden they start to realise there's less profit in the business, and then they...
Okay, so as you got from even those few seconds, this view of the world he's describing is one of consumer-centered activism. The idea that gradually a larger and larger percentage of people are refusing to drink cow milk, and thus, as he says, stores stop buying cow milk, and then cows stop being bred to live their whole lives in captivity to produce cow milk, etc. And that view basically entails that we only achieve a vegan world or a vegan society or even a vegan town when we get way past 51% of the population being vegan. So as a matter of fact, my view, my really explicitly political view of veganism is much more optimistic, because I think that 5% of people can have a dynamic impact on society, and I've seen that again and again. It is not the case that homosexuals needed to become 51% of society to get their changes to the laws passed. It is not the case that activists who were against cigarette smoking had to become 51% of the population to get their changes to our society passed, and they're quite dramatic. I'm not really old enough to remember that change. It's really my parents' generation who can remember the time when cigarette smoking was everywhere. There was a time when if you bought a boardroom table, if you bought a table for boardroom meetings, it had ashtrays built into it. People were smoking all the time during public meetings, etc., etc. It is definitely not the case. One of my favorite examples to look at is the groups that are against drunk driving, like Mothers Against Drunk Driving. They didn't have to become 51% of the population. They didn't even have to become 10% of the population. They made dramatic changes to the society we live in. These are success stories. There are also tragic failures, I think. I think we can look at the status of First Nations people in Canada, or Indigenous people, of minority groups that failed to put together the aspects necessary to succeed as lobbyists to bring about the political changes they wanted. I do think, it's very sad. I sympathize with, I support. I would much prefer to be in a country like Canada if our government did support, for example, the status of Indigenous people's languages, etc., etc. It's an issue I've been involved with in the past. It's an issue I care about. It's not my point. My point is to say this is a failure. Not all of the examples are positive. We can look at positive examples, we can look at negative examples, and obviously, in terms of their political organization, their funding, their access to government, in many ways, the struggle for gay rights had many, many advantages, tactical advantages, over the struggle for First Nations rights, Indigenous people's rights within Canada. Not going to get into that in this video. My view of veganism is that we can win with 5%. His view of veganism is we can only win with something like 90%. And that's why he's so fucking depressed. He actually is thinking of this, short-term and long-term, as a kind of consumer boycott. If you search for the word boycott on this channel, I think it's on this channel, but I also did a whole podcast on the boycott mentality within veganism, and I think that's a Patreon-only podcast, so I'm sorry I forget to what extent it's on YouTube and to what extent it's on Patreon. But I do think that the boycott mentality within veganism is actually problematic. The boycott mentality takes us so far, but only so far, and no further. And we have to move past that. And I'm sorry, maybe I should dig up that podcast and actually upload part of it to YouTube, because it's a really good discussion. And a lot of people said to me in response to that, Wow, I never thought about that before, but it's true. Veganism, it partly is a boycott movement, and it partly is not. And again, we could just come back to a simple example like cigarette smoking. The anti-smoking movement is not just a boycott movement. They're not just trying to boycott cigarettes. It's also a public education movement. It's a public policy movement because they're trying to stop everyone from smoking cigarettes. And yes, that does sometimes result in ridiculous laws. Like I used to walk past a hospital in Canada, and all the time you would see the medical doctors, not the patients, the doctors and the nurses who would have to walk outside the hospital and walk to the nearest street corner to smoke a cigarette, because now we got these laws in Canada that you can't smoke inside the hospital. You can't even smoke close to the hospital. It's oppressive. We're oppressing the cigarette smokers, I admit it, but this is part of a grander design for social change that we're engaged in pursuing. What percentage of Canadians were ever a part of that movement, were ever part of an actual organized political movement to bring about social change, to gradually eliminate cigarette smoking, and to not so gradually at all stigmatize cigarette smoking? That's what it is. It's a stigma. We're making those medical doctors ashamed that they still smoke cigarettes while they're advising other people to quit smoking. There's push and pull. It is what it is. I don't even think 5% of Canadians ever got organized or ever got engaged, but we managed to achieve that social change. I really doubt 10% of people were really active and organized in gay rights movements. It's probably, if you can get a realistic estimate, it's probably much smaller than that. But again, gay rights movements had some really big advantages in terms of the fact that homosexuals are distributed throughout the whole of society pretty much randomly and pretty much equally. So there were gay lawyers, there were gay people within the government, there were gay people. There are also, of course, gay people living in poverty, don't get me wrong. There are gay people who work at the corner store. There are gay people who work at the gas station. But the fact that there were some gay people who were already lobbyists for the federal government, who were already lawyers, who already had those positions, that was a huge advantage. And for our Indigenous people in Canada, you have to be dreaming if you think Indigenous people in Canada are distributed randomly or evenly. They're not distributed evenly geographically. They're not distributed evenly financially, like in terms of their economic situation of society, et cetera, et cetera. There are really huge obstacles for them to overcome. That's one of the reasons why, as a dynamic minority rights-based movement, homosexuals were so much more effective, were so much more successful than Indigenous people in Canada. What's our status, vegans? What's it going to be for us? Are we going to be a bunch of fucking losers with yoga mats selling weight loss dreams? Is that the future of veganism? Your choice. You decide. Are we going to be, as my good friend Charles Marlowe said, are we going to be a bunch of degenerates selling fad diet books? Are we going to put ourselves into the hippie ghetto or the left-wing ghetto or the anti-capitalist ghetto? Or are we going to be, in a sense, the pro-capitalist ghetto? Are we going to be just another consumerist fad hobby selling you, all the different ways you can make money out of vegan cheese or whatever? What's it going to be? I think we can look at the groups that lobbied for change on cigarettes, on alcohol, on drunk driving, the groups that lobby for gay rights. I think we can do better. I think actually we have a lot of advantages over groups that are really oppressed, that are really marginalized. Some vegans are rich, some vegans are poor. But actually, there's no excuse for what pathetic failures we've been so far. I think with far fewer than 5% of people becoming vegan, we can actually start lobbying for dynamic social change. And yes, some of that is from the grassroots, is from the bottom up, but some of it, if we're being honest, is from the top down.